proud father of 14-year-old triplets. I was very much involved in their lives, so I do believe, obviously, in shared parenting. However, I haven't seen my children, or been with my children for the past 3.5 years. I have a broken heart. And I have a broken heart due to alienation and a broken system. My case over the last few years has become the poster child of parental alienation. I've been in the system for going on 8+ years. I feel like I've been raped by the system. I call it legally sanctioned neglect. Our system has helped eradicate me as a loving parent and my 3 children. My children were unjustifiably robbed of one of the only 2 people who will love them unconditionally for their entire lives. It's a tragedy when this occurs. Yet the system allows it. Children have rights, and my children's rights have been violated to have both parents in their lives. My experience has been professionals here in the state of Connecticut, they exploit families. And it seems like the bigger your financial statement is, you could count on the more you're going to get exploited. And I'm talking about GALs, AMCs, and therapists. I have no trust in our court system. I had a GAL for over 7 years, Attorney Len Pellegrino. Under her watch, it's been a complete failure. I could talk for the next hour on all the things that she didn't do, that she needed to do, that are actually part of the training. In 2010, I asked for family therapy. Her response in court was, this family is beyond counseling. Now, can you imagine a guardian ad litem actually making that recommendation to the court? Judge Whetstone at that point decided that this family needed psychological evaluations. So now you're in there with a $15,000 psychological evaluation. Attorney Pellegrino, GAL Pellegrino, she sat on the sidelines. And I do believe that she could have made a difference. I believe if the GAL in my case did their job, I wouldn't be here today. Next, I got involved with an AMC, who I happen to have for the last 2.5 years. She got involved as a result of a stall tactic. We were about to start a motion, start a hearing, and the judge and the opposing side decided that they wanted a continuance. Since the continuance was denied, then let me request an AMC, and that occurred. I can't tell you. My AMC refers to my 14-year-old children as her clients. That's a disgrace, her clients. At one point when I was in court, the AMC actually asked me to take out my wallet, just like this. Take out your wallet. She asked me to take my charge cards out. And I took them out one by one, and she wanted to know, how much credit do you have on those cards? How much credit do you have? Because I want to start banging up those cards. Needless to say, what I feel as far as best interest. The current GAL system, in my opinion, is built to devastate families. There's financial incentives, which are there to increase the fight, not to end it. There's too many GALs. I believe the statistic was 23% of all cases now have GALs. If that statistic is correct, there's way too many GALs. And you ask, why do we have all these GALs? Well, the answer is very simple. It's no more than another revenue stream for attorneys who aren't making the money that they once did, because so many people are forced to represent themselves as pro se litigants. There's little or no oversight in this whole system. They have immunity, which they don't deserve. There's 30 hours of training with no testing. There's no continuing education. I have spent over $130,000 between a GAL and an AMC. They have little or no training and counseling, and you can't get rid of them if you needed to. I know Co-Chair Cousineau made a statement in the previous task force that there is a mechanism in place. Well, there might very well be, but show us the statistics of how many cases have been filed to remove a GAL and how many have been removed. I had a mental health professional who was court-ordered who told me in 35 years, don't even try to remove a GAL, because in over 35 years, it has never happened, that I have never seen it happen. So to have a system in place to remove a GAL that you might as well say is impossible, it's a waste of time. It never happens. If you want to improve the model, look at some of the states that have made reform, such as Arizona, Maine, and Massachusetts.
Mr. Mastrangelo, can I ask you to bring it to a summary,
Yes.
please?
Better yet, just look at what we're doing here in Connecticut for indigent families. I cannot understand why they happen to have a better system than privately held. In closing, I just want to say there's a lot of lobbyists here that are supporting this because they want status quo for the Connecticut bar. We know that. They want status quo for family attorneys. We know that. And they certainly want status quo for the guardian ad litems, especially those that are doing that full time. I say one thing, people who are part of the problem certainly cannot fix the problem. My children need me in their lives, and I will continue to fight until that day finally comes, no matter what the sacrifices are. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Mr. Weissmuller.
You said that you haven't seen your kids now in quite some time. I'm not sure exactly what you said. But my understanding is you had an order that allowed you to have access between you and your ex-wife, and that order was in place for a period of time?
Yes, for close to 3 years.
Okay, and then at that point, at some point, did she file some kind of a motion to stop you from seeing them?
No, it actually, what occurred was we were about to go to trial. There would have been probably, I've spent close to $300,000.
On this, on your.
I'm trying to be in my children's lives.
Okay.
And in March 18th, we were ready for a trial. There was expert witnesses.
No, I mean before that.
Oh,
you said that you had an order in place for a number of years.
Yes.
Right. What happened to that order?
Well, the children decided, alienated children decided that they were no longer going to come to my house.
How old were your children when they made that decision?
My children were 11 years old, and I had a guardian ad litem who felt that it was okay for 11-year-old children. And then I got caught up in the system. And when you get caught up in the system, what that means is going to be delays. I had Judge Gould, when I said to him that when he allowed the AMC to come in, and I knew there was a continuance, Judge Gould's response was, and when I pleaded, when you're dealing with alienation, time is against you. And I suddenly had to wait 3 or 4 more months. Judge Gould's response was, every case here is equally as important. What that told me, he certainly has no clue about alienation, none. Because if you think that a person who's coming in for a simple motion, and their case is just as important as somebody who hasn't seen, at that point, their children for a year and a half, I'm not sure if you ought to be wearing that robe.
If I understand you correctly, your children stopped coming over at age 11.
Yes.
But you mentioned a trial in March of this year?
Yes.
Did you see your children from the time they were age 11 to age 13?
No.
No order changed that?
No order changed that. When you get as many professionals involved as my case has, then and you say, how can this happen? Well, just to get a court date. You know, I'd be in court for 2 days, off for 3 months. GAL couldn't make it because she's on vacation. Then you come back and somebody else has a trial. So when you get caught up with an AMC, a GAL, and this is a very complicated case, and there's no sense of urgency, you go 2 or 3 years like I have, and nobody seems to really care.
Now, I asked somebody before, and I don't know if you were here, but would it have assisted you in your case if there was a mechanism similar to a child support mechanism, where if someone doesn't pay support, you can go in and say, hey, I've not received support. Can you have this person show cause why they shouldn't be held in contempt, and have it be on a sort of a fast track, where you, because that exists, where people will go in and you'll be able to ask, you know, I need my money, Judge. No one's paying me. You've got to have mom or dad do what they're supposed to do. And I've actually seen the judges, and I've actually done this, where you say, well, you have to pay now, or you prove to me that you can't, or you may have to go to jail. Would that help you if there was a mechanism in place like that?
Oh, it certainly would. However, the problem is people don't understand how to identify alienation. Judges don't.
Well, I'm not talking about alienation, because the children technically aren't ordered to show up on your step. The other side is ordered to bring them, and you're ordered to bring them back.
Right.
Okay? So
If there was consequences, whether they be financial or a threat of loss of custody, none of this would be happening. Unfortunately, in my particular case, nobody decided that consequences were needed, and 11-year-old children should be making the choice on whether they do or don't want to go to the other parent.
now, in the course of your proceeding, at any time was the guardian ad litem asked to go to your house, look and see if your house is safe, if you have proper food? Did they talk to you about discipline and how you discipline your children? Was there any inquiry into something you were doing wrong?
No. First of all, the guardian ad litem never visited my house. Once the AMC got onto the case, she realized that the guardian ad litem did not fulfill what she should have been doing. So the AMC did visit my house. Other than that, there's been never an accusation, thank God, of any abuse or neglect or anything like that. People who know me know that I'm a loving parent who just wants to be in their children's lives and whose children need me in their lives.
So I have a question. Was there a court order for you to have visitation and it was being denied, or you didn't have access?
Oh, I actually had a very liberal, that was the problem. I had the children too much time. And what I mean by that is we had agreed on a visitation schedule, on a parenting schedule, with the help of the guardian ad litem and Dr. John Collins. And I actually had the kids about 40% of the time. But there was an agenda, okay? My ex-wife asked for sole custody 3 times, and she never got it. Well, she finally did get it by circumventing the court system, and that's called parental alienation. She didn't need the court system at that point to accomplish what the court didn't give her 3 different times asking for sole custody.
So are you saying eventually she started denying your access to the children?
She didn't deny it. All of a sudden, the children didn't want to go, and that became a normal situation. And days went into weeks, weeks went into months. There was no urgency with the court system. And here it is 3.5 years later, and I'm still fighting to get into my children's lives.
So, when you went to court, I mean, I have the same concern I think that Mr. Weissmuller has, that 11-year-olds are allowed to make these decisions. If they said they didn't want to go to school,
Right.
or they didn't want to brush their teeth, they would be told to brush their teeth and go to school. So, I mean, I sympathize with the difficulty here. I'm also concerned about why it took, if you can tell us, so long. I know you said people were on vacation, but 2 years, did you have court hearings? Did you have an opportunity to give evidence? I mean, I'm concerned that things take that long.
Yeah, and so am I. Yes, we were in and out of court, off and on, off and on. When a case like this exists, it needs to go to the top of the list. It needs to somehow, the system needs to make these alienating cases a priority, okay? And this was not a priority. It was treated like any other case. So again, it just kept going and going and going. And when you have multiple attorneys, my ex-wife had 2 attorneys, I have 1, you have therapists involved, you have guardian ad litems involved, you have AMCs involved, and everybody has a different schedule. And then you got the court schedule. So somehow, some way, it ended up going, here it is, 3.5 years later.
Thank you. Any other questions? Representative Gonzalez.
Thank you. What were some of the things that the GAL did to enable the alienation?
To alleviate it?
No. Enable
Oh.
it, yeah.
Most of it was what she didn't do. You know, for instance, I had filed a motion back in 2008 to prevent access from my children going on vacation with my ex-wife's boyfriend. Whether you want to call it a moral thing or not, we're in the middle of, we weren't even divorced yet at the time. Her answer when I filed that motion, thousands of dollars to file the motion, her answer when asked was, the children feel comfortable with him going with the boyfriend. They've done it before, and they wouldn't be real happy if they weren't able to go to Bermuda. Motion denied because courts listen to the person who's supposed to be looking out for the children's best interest. And by the way, when I hear that phrase, to the children's best interest, it's the most overused cliche in the court system. In many cases, it's not even in the top 5. So, but yet everybody the judges depends on the eyes and ears of the court. And when and who's better off to be making decisions? A stranger who you're not even sure of that person's moral compass. So anyhow, but I could go on and on about all the different ways in which this particular GAL failed.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Verraneault. Full disclosure.
Yes, should I? So my name is Jennifer Verraneault, and Jerry is my fiancé. So I know all about everything, and that's kind of how I got involved in the task force. And I would like to say there are a lot of good GALs out there, and there's some that aren't so good. And maybe it's just a lack of education. But the question I have that I would like Jerry to point out, you know, some of the things you talked about with the GAL, I know that you did see a reunification therapist. I was reading your testimony. And there was one point, at a point where the reunification therapist was stated in his notes that he was unable to perform his duties as a reunification therapist because he didn't have the GAL or the child therapist or the ex-wife on board. Can you elaborate on that and how that whole thing worked out?
Well, I had a court order for reunification therapy. And that again delayed this whole process because everybody says, well, let's wait and see if that works. Well, the problem with that was...
Can I just interrupt? Was your ex-wife ordered to participate in that reunification therapy or just you and the kids?
Me and the kids.
Okay.
The problem was in probably a year, the children made it 3 times together. So the problem that existed that the children couldn't come over my house Well, now we were listening to the children. The children didn't want to go for reunification. So reunification ultimately failed, and it also failed because, again, the reunification therapist felt that he did not have the guardian ad litem on board. The guardian ad litem was not supportive of it because she didn't think he was doing a good enough job. And by the way, the reunification therapist was the first one who actually, if you want to use the word, sided with me, because he identified some problems. And all of a sudden, that became a problem. How can I suddenly be a person who was kind of, didn't do the wrong thing when everybody else, the children's therapist, who's actually being investigated by the state of Connecticut, Dr. Michael Pines, he had these kids for 3 years, didn't even have a treatment plan. He perpetuated. And when Dr. Miller talks about people, in alienation, if a therapist doesn't understand alienation, they're actually validating these alienated children's opinions. In my case, he actually made the alienation worse. So all of a sudden, when we got to reunification therapy, it didn't stand a chance. It didn't stand a chance because, number one, there wasn't enough treatment. And finally, it got to the point where it didn't make sense.
Thank you.
Yes.
Representative Gonzalez.
Thank you for the second time. I heard a lot about your case, and one of the things that I heard about you, it was that you was always been very vocal about your case. Always, you're not afraid. You always say what you think, and you've been out there fighting for your kids. But on March 18th, even though that you've been so vocal in this case, on March 18th, you signed an agreement. Can you say what kind of agreement and why?
Well, on March 18th when we went, and yes, to go back to me being vocal, I was. And there was billboards throughout the state of Connecticut. I was on numerous radio stations. I was on Fox 61. And as a result of my case and the publicity that surrounded my case, that's actually how State Senator Fazano became aware of this, and that's why we're here today. We're here today because my case, State Senator Fazano recognized it, and he's the one that presented this bill. So when March 18th came along, that was actually our trial. And
Is that of 2013?
2013.
13, thank you. I don't want to interrupt, I just want to clarify, thanks.
And this was obviously a long-awaited trial, and there was expert witnesses, and we were all geared up to go. And then there was some conversation that morning on how can this case somehow get resolved. And it went on all day. And again, I brought a lot of attention to this, and I'm sure the Connecticut Bar and people involved in the legal system, I wasn't on there. I'm not going to get any Christmas cards from any of them, okay? So the court decided, and we're going back and forth all day, what are we going to do? Can we get this resolved? And at this point, I was told another $75,000 to $80,000 in fees to get through that week. And I had to make a decision. And I was advised by my attorney that maybe what we can do is to get some reunification therapy, because that may be at the end, that's all we get, even with a strong case as we had. Well, I didn't want to go, I did not want to settle the case that way, and it kept going back and forth. At 4:45, and the court closes at 5 o'clock, I decided I was getting pressured. And even the GAL, I mean, imagine this, a GAL and an AMC asking if we settle this, we'll actually cut our fees. I mean, that's hard to believe, right? Half the times they're looking for ways to pad bills, never mind, cut fees. So I had to make a decision. children are 14. What do I do? I didn't know what to do, quite honestly. And I somehow ended up in the judge's quarters. I call it I got sequestered. They certainly didn't want me around my family or my closest friends because, you know, my head was spinning. It was now we were there from 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock and, you know, haven't taken the stand. And we decided to make this agreement that we weren't going to go forward. We talked about a new beginning. All right, everybody's back there and this new beginning. And I trusted my attorney enough where, and I'm almost shameful to say, I did not carefully read what I was signing. And I made a big mistake. On the last paragraph of the 7-page agreement that I signed, which was not explained to me by my attorney, it said that this agreement would supersede all other agreements, including your parenting plan. Okay? So, court stays open. Now, when was the last time a court decided to stay open and pay overtime for a person? Well, they decided to do it for me, and it was at 6:30, and we got in front of a judge. The judge never bothered, which I felt he had an obligation to when he got to that paragraph 7, none of this was read, and asked if I understood it, and I said yes. Were you represented? Yes. And he never said to me, Mr. Mastrangelo, do you understand what paragraph 7 means? That you are no longer going to have a parenting plan. He never said that. And I signed it reluctantly. I was still confused. It was a long day, there was a lot of pressure on me, and I made a mistake, and I signed it. So here it is. Now I have joint legal custody with no parenting plan. But Dr. Sidney Horowitz is going to solve the problem. I had to pay him $3,000, and he had to determine 2 things. Are the children resilient enough? And if so, then I will provide the name of a reunification therapist. Okay? Well, here it is, 10 months later, and I still do not have a name of a reunification therapist. I not only had to pay Dr. Sidney Horowitz $3,000, but to talk about, he recommended one person, Dr. Grant Hall, who after I met with her on 2 occasions decided this case wasn't for her. It's too complex. And not only that, but Dr. Sidney Horowitz made sure, because he said some things that in my opinion were unprofessional and led her not to take the case. So now Dr. Horowitz has to come up with a name, another name. Well, he comes up with a name with a person in Boston, Massachusetts. Now that makes a lot of sense. We got to go to Boston for reunification therapy. We go into court and nobody seems to understand why. Why Boston, Massachusetts? Everybody's shrugging their shoulders saying, this makes no sense. Well, what do we have to do? We have to go now spend more money to go see Dr. Horowitz so he could explain why. And when we talk about, I'll use the word extortion, well, that cost me probably about another $3,000 for that meeting. Dr. Horowitz asked for $1,625 to talk about why he chose a person in Boston. At that point, we had to come back to court and go to Boston. Well, I never went to Boston because when I spoke to Dr. Deutsch said to me, I'm not going to do reunification therapy. You're too far away. However, I do have a camp for $20,000 that I would be very happy for you to be involved in. I says, unfortunately, the camp, I can't afford it at this point. So here it is now, 10 months, and we'll be back to court next week. And Dr. Deutsch, I finally got an email on December 23rd from Dr. Deutsch saying, I never had intentions of doing reunification therapy. So now another 10 months has gone by, and I'm still not in front of a therapist. Everything that could go wrong has gone wrong. And here it is 3.5 years later, without a parenting plan. And by the way, I tried to go back to get that order clarified, vacated, and what have you. And with all due respect, I'm in front of a judge who's been retired for 13 years, who's in his 80s. And this, the same judge that was there on March 18th. And unfortunately, this is a very complex case. And I quite honestly don't understand why Judge Monroe, who happens to be in New Haven, doesn't decide to get this case and get it out of the hands of a retired judge, a referee, I should say, who retired 13 years ago. Because at this point, every time I go into court, he reminds me, March 18th, you signed it, and I'd be the last person. And I told him that, Your Honor, if you explain to me that I was giving up my parenting plan, me of all people, I brought more attention to the subject of alienation than anybody in the state of Connecticut, I would be the last person that would give up a parenting plan. But he's holding me to March 18th, and that's it.
So in a way, it's like you became vocal when you realized that the system failed you and you didn't have no contact with your kid for 2 years.
Yeah, and then I got blamed. Remember, for 2 years, there was no publicity in this case. And my children were allowed not to see me at 11, 12, 13 years old. And then once the publicity started after 2 years, well, then that now became the reason why my children didn't want to see me. They didn't want to hear that or see a billboard or hear that I was on TV. That is now the reason that's given, but the timeline's a little bit off. For 2 years, there was no publicity in my case, but yet the AMC says, well, your children now don't want to see you because they were embarrassed. They were humiliated at school. They read the articles. They saw the Facebook and all this other stuff.
So it's always a story, and they've been stalling the case and stalling the case, and you keep spending money. You know, be happy to know if we can go to Dr. Harris and say, hey, you have $2,000 that belong to me. You didn't help me. I want my money back. Maybe he will go back to court and say, Mr. D'Angelo came, or Mastrangelo came to me and asked me for the $2,000. Maybe the judge will put you in jail because you request your money back.
Well,
I will say, you know, we've been here all day, and we listen to a lot of stories, and sad stories. And now we keep saying, some members of this panel saying, the system is broken. It's broken. Something is wrong out there, and it's not about the best interest of the kids. It's about money. It's about money. And you know what? I've been here 17 years, and I heard about this case, I think in 2010. And I was out there meeting with people, and I realized that when you explain what's going on, you know, in the court system, a lot of people will say, no, that's not possible. It's unbelievable. You know, that's not possible. How are you going to have, you know, therapists, lawyers, judges, guardians ad litems, and all these people involved? No, that's not true. But in reality, I think that today, people demonstrating, people, I think, kind of prove us that, yes, it is possible because, again, it's not in the best interest of the kid. It's about milking the people down to the end. And then what is sad is some of these people lose their money, lose their home, and end up losing the kids. And then we say, why am I going to fight for my kids? If at the end, I end up just broke with nothing. So if you don't fight for your kids, you're not good for the court system. No, that man or that woman, no, they don't care about the kids. And when you fight, you got to pay for it. And I'm real sorry that you've been going through all of that. And I hope that, I don't know what's going to happen, but I wish you, luck in your case.
Thank you.
And my question to you is this. We know there is a lot of gag orders out there. Yeah, you can say anything, because if you mention this and you take the kids to school or to the doctor or whatever, we'll put you in jail. And that's why, you see, we have a lot of people today here, maybe like 79, 80 people here to testify. And we know there's a lot more out there. They're afraid. They are afraid. And that's why we didn't have a lot more people here. And what's going to happen? I don't know, but I've been meeting with my speaker, and I told him it is a problem. He was totally, he wasn't aware about what was going on, and hopefully, we'll be able to at least to do something about this, and to start and try to resolve the problem. And with all your help, because I know that everybody that is here today, they got their own story, but they also want to help. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry it took up so much time, but I appreciate the
Thank you very much. What's the Krajewski family doing? We have 2 spots right now, so who's coming up?
Both.
Okay.